let's start with sketching the robins. So if you like to follow along, I suggest that you use an HB pencil, because with an HB pencil it's easiest to erase the pencil lines when you make a mistake or before we start with painting, because we don't want to have too many pencil lines in the end result. Now also, I created an outline of the sketch for you. It's in a PDF file. You can download it following the link in the description. So this way you've got an example to sketch and to trace if you like to. If you have never drawn a robin before, I can imagine that this is a giant leap. This is not a tutorial for very beginners. I am going to create that in the future. So if you're a total beginner, I suggest that you trace the lines and then you can follow along with the painting part, because personally I think that's the most easiest part. As you can see, I am sketching here, so I have pencil lines that I don't like in the end result, and I'm using a soft eraser to get rid of those. And then I use a brush to get rid of the excess eraser stuff on my paper. So a robin is a little round bird, and I like to draw it kind of chubby, so especially the body is very round, and then another circle shaped shape on top of it for the head, playful wings, and you can make the breast kind of heart-shaped if you like. I like to have some variation. I love to sketch and draw robins. I do it quite often, and every time I create other robins. So this one I am drawing sitting on top of a branch. There are a few things very characteristic about the robin, and one of them is the location of the eye, like in the corner of its head where it's a bit curvy, and also the beak of a robin is like a small triangle shaped. So a new robin, I'm starting again with a round shape and then make it a little bit wobbly. So now curving it for a wing and the tail. A place for the head and the chest. Again, make it like an upside down heart at the bottom. If you do this often, you really get the hang of it and you can get very playful. Again, if you are a beginner, don't hesitate to download the PDF with the traced outline and trace it, or try to copy the drawing. Don't make it too difficult for yourself, because once the sketch is finished and you're satisfied, then we are going to start with the painting part, and I absolutely love that part. I think we are going to create something really, really beautiful. So working on the fifth robin here, I like to have some variation with the direction the robins are looking at, the way they are sitting. So I'm only drawing sitting robins at this point. I have drawn flying robins in the past. I like to do that as well. But for now, I think this is the easiest. So I like to also have some variation with the branches they're sitting on. So I've got two robins sitting on a branch, both different, and the other robins they are just sitting on thin air, sitting on the paper. So I like to add some other things at the composition as well. Like example, the berries. I also like to draw leaves, autumn leaves, acorn leaves. I often use my designs to create seamless patterns, and then I like it to add some other elements to make it one big beautiful composition. So I like to make one more robin. So because I don't have so much space, I'm making it a bit smaller and try to have it in a way that it fits the space. So this one is facing down. So it looks a bit different than the other robins that I have painted, because you see it a little bit more from the top instead of the side. So you also see two eyes. So because this is a different angle, it's a bit more difficult, or at least it's different than what we've done before. So you really need to look closely. The wings and everything, they are drawn from a different direction. So I like to make one more robin. So because I don't have so much space, I'm making it a bit smaller and try to have it in a way that it fits the space. So this one is facing down. So it looks a bit different than the other robins that I have painted, because you see it a little bit more from the top instead of the side. So you also see two eyes. So because this is a different angle, it's a bit more difficult, or at least it's different than what we've done before. So you really need to look closely. The wings and everything, they are drawn from a different direction. So now we're finished with the sketching. It is time to erase it. Yes, you heard me correctly. I'm using a kneading eraser to lift off the pencil lines. So you've got some really thin pencil lines, so you know exactly where you need to paint. Only the pencil lines aren't too harsh, they aren't too hard, so that in the end result, when you're finished with painting, you don't see them, or you see less of them. And now it's time to start with painting. I like to start with orange to paint the robins. I really love their orange and red colored breasts and face. So I am going to paint this for all the robins. I like to use one color and go through my entire composition where I know that I'll be using that same color. And then I am going very quickly, at least as quick as I can. Of course, I don't want to be messy or make any mistakes, but I like to drop in some other colors while the paint is still wet, so that it blends in very nicely. So I'm already starting with these three. I've got some darker orange, and I'm dropping in some colors from the side. It blends in very nicely, makes a nice shade. And I am already seeing the beautiful colors of the robins. We just started with painting, but they already make me very happy. So the other two we paint with the orange. And then again, we are going to drop in some of the darker orange. And I don't really think about it. I suggest you don't think about it, just keep it playful. They don't need to look the same. Now with some burnt umber, dark brown, I am painting the top of the birds and their wing. So I'm also dropping in some darker pigmented brown in the wing of this bird and then moving on to the next one. So I think I'm going to paint the heads and the sides and perhaps a few wings of the birds with this beautiful brown color. And what I try to do is paint within the pencil lines. I don't want the paint to touch the lines, so then later on I can erase them once the paint has dried. And another benefit of painting with this method is that the paint doesn't touch the other paint that is still wet. You see it happening with a few of the birds, that on a few spots the brown paint is blending in with the yellow or the orange paint. And for those few spots, I don't mind. I actually really like it. It gives a certain characteristic that you have when painting with watercolor paint, but because it is subtle and it doesn't happen everywhere. So I'm dropping in some indigo blue to use as a shade. I don't like to use black when painting, so when I need a darker space, I really love to use indigo. So we've got two more robins that can use some brown. So basically we are repeating the same steps. So for this one I'm also starting with the tail, and I like to do that for this one as well. Again, adding some indigo for shading. And then I see that this robin doesn't have any orange yet. So now that we painted the darker brown parts of the birds, I like to move on to start paint the bellies of the robins. For this I am using a really light brown wash, so the same brown that we used for the heads and the wings, mixed with a little bit of light ochre, and use a lot of water to thin down the pigment. So if I think I've got too much pigment on my brush, I'm adding some more water. And while the paint is still wet, I am adding some burnt umber again, some dark brown, at the bottom of the bellies for shading. And I make sure that it really flows into the other paint. You really get these almost like watercolor blooms effects. And now it's time to paint the legs of the birds. So with the darker orange, I'm tracing in the pencil lines. Basically, that's all it. We already made the sketch, so you know exactly where the legs need to go. So now we are done with the legs, and I like to start painting in the leaves. I'm using sap green for this. So again, we already traced the outlines, so it's a very easy coloring exercise. There are many ways to paint leaves. Don't make it too difficult for yourself. I also like to have some other colors. For example, this acorn leaf, I am going to have some autumn colors on it. So again, starting with some brown, but then we're going to drop in some yellow and some light ochre to really give it a nice autumn effect. So here we go with some yellow and some light ochre. Just drop it in there and let the paint do the rest. Of course, we need to paint in the acorns, using some ochre for that and some burnt umber as well. For this you can use the top of your round brush. I'm using a size 6. You can also try to use a smaller brush. I'm going to make this nice autumn leaf red, a little bit brownish red. So basically what we're doing now is drawing in this coloring sheet. All the leaves and all the berries and other things that we've painted. I like to have some variation with the colors that I'm using. So for this branch I'm using a darker green. You can do what I'm doing or you can pick your own colors. So now that the orange paint has dried, we can paint the beaks of the robins and the eyes using indigo blue. I waited especially for the orange paint to dry because in this case, if I would accidentally touch the orange with the indigo, then it would start blending in, and I really didn't want it to happen at this point because I really like the contrast to be clear from the beaks of the robins. Same goes for the eyes. If there's going to be too much blending, then the shapes aren't as clear and it has a huge effect of the end result. So I'm using a smaller round brush for this because I'm really wanting to be in control and paint these details. So I thought that the beaks were too dark, so I'm using some a paper towel to dab on a few of those beaks, and they are a bit lighter now. So maybe later on I'm going to drop in a bit more pigment, but for now I'm really liking this. So really with the tip of my brush I am drawing in those eyes. So they really are looking or starting to look like robins now. This is the time that I start adding some details. So I'm looking at my robins and I am wondering where the wings or the tails can use some extra lines. And now with the really small round brush, I am adding some stripes, some really small stripes, like details of the feathers of the birds. And I'm doing that on several places. I am looking where I want those, making it playful. I also use it to add some details on those legs. So you can look at your own design and paint lines where you think your design can use some. At this point I'm adding some extra shading. I like to add longer stripes on the tails of the birds and on their wings, and the really short stripes are for details of the feathers. I also like to do it on a few places where the orange and the light brown are sort of touching each other. So like an effect of the feathers going over it. So again, you can follow along exactly as what I am doing, or you can make this something your own and add some details wherever you like to. This is like the most fun part of the painting. I always love to add details. I don't like to think about it too much and just look what feels good where I think it could use some extra. And I love how the robins are coming together. I've been loving this entire process so far, but I'm also really happy with the colors. The orange, the brown and the green, they match perfectly together. So I think this is going to make a really beautiful seamless pattern. I really hope that you're enjoying this painting process and loving your results as well. I love to see what you create, so if you like to share it on social media, please tag me and use hashtag #CreateWithSandras. If you like some feedback, don't hesitate to ask. I'm happy to give you any feedback. I hope this video inspires you to paint more often, and I am creating more content every week. I love to add some vertical lines on these branches. I really love the playful effect it gives. I also like to add some little stripes for the playful feather effects with some dark orange on the orange part or the red part of the robins. And of course the leaves can use some extra details as well. For this I use a very dark green. The acorns I like to paint with very loose stripes. And then there are also some leaves I like to use some really straight lines and like a lot. So I am using some variation. I like to mix and match and make sure that the composition is balanced. I also paint some details on the other leaves, and I like to look at the color that is used for the wash and then pick a similar color, only darker, for the details. Also adding some details on the acorns. And once we are done with these details, I always love to add some details with metallic paint. I love the finishing touch that the shimmering of the metallic paint gives to painting. So the dots that I have painted as a, well, like a cozy effect to the illustration, I like to paint over with some copper paint. I also like to add some copper to a few of the berries. Adding some red metallic paint as well, and then I am moving on to my green metallic paint to add some extra details on those leaves. And the final finishing touch before this art print is finished, we are adding some white in the eyes of the birds. For this you need to make sure that the indigo blue of the eyes has perfectly dried. And then use some white gouache and a small brush to add small dots in the side of the eyes. So we are done! I hope that you liked this video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like to see more content, don't forget to subscribe.